You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
You got problems that you ought to be concerned with. Moolah! You don't know how you're supposed to earn it, or what to do with it, or how to keep it. You're a freak with a dark, shameful secret. But you're not the only one. Get your hidden financial fears with a blast of sun. Now your healing has begun. It's Bad with Money with
Gabe S.
Done.
Hello and welcome to Bad with Money, a show about finances and feelings where we don't talk down to you. I'm your host, Gabe Dunn, and with me today is Danielle Elliot. Would you like to tell my audience who you are and what you do?
I would love to. So I'm Danielle Elliot. I'm the reporter and host on a new investigative series called Climbing the Walls that looks into the rise of ADHD diagnoses among women. And when I'm not making that podcast, I'm a science reporter, and also I produce documentaries and podcasts.
Okay, so let's talk about, can you break down what is ADHD?
The way that I describe it is that you have challenges with focusing, and then it's also a million other things, as I've learned in the process of reporting this show.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, it impacts your emotional regulation. It impacts, like when I say a range of issues with focus, it might mean that you hyper focus on something and you get so into it that you sort of, at least in my case, forget the rest of the world exists. But you also might have a really hard time sitting still and being fidgety, which I'm going to try to control today. But yeah, it's sort of much more, I think the easiest way to explain it is it's much more than we all are sort of taught when we're younger. It's not just an inability to sit still. It's many, many other things.
So yeah, I think a lot of people don't really get into the hyperfocus element of it. So can you explain what a hyperfocus is? Because I have autism and normally that's given to us, right? Oh, the hyperfocus, the hyperfixation. So can you explain what that is? Does that look different?
I don't know if it looks different in ADHD and autism, but I know that in terms of ADHD, it looks like I'm really good at speaking in examples. So for myself, it was like I had a book idea last year, and once I had an agent involved, I sat down and wrote 110 pages in 2 days. So it's sort of that, I think that sort of captures what it is. It's like you get fixated on an idea and it's the only thing you can think about. And when I was sitting and writing those pages, there were other things I needed to do, but it was like none of it existed. All I could focus on was writing these pages. And it was like suddenly having the motivation. It's like a deep interest in something. But I think for a lot of people, it becomes, I'm talking about the good side of it. I think that if you, like, I don't have children, so it's okay. There was no one who I was sort of, and I don't have a partner. I wasn't neglecting any personal responsibilities that would impact other people when I got into my hyper-focused state. But it really is something where it's like this state where your brain locks in on something, and that's what you're locked in on until you're not.
Yeah, I will say the downside to that, because people always talk about, oh, it's a superpower. And for me, the downside to that is you do neglect other things. You also have no concept of if that is useful in any way, which like you have to let go of the idea that it's going to be for anything. It's going to make you any money. It's going to do anything. I have friends who are like, well, I wouldn't do that unless I was guaranteed or getting paid or knew that the writing would go somewhere. Meanwhile, I finished an entire novel that for whomst.
Exactly.
And like that took away from other work I could have been doing or focusing on that actually mattered. Or, I mean, not that it didn't matter, but, like it just becomes, and then anybody who says, oh, what if this isn't a good idea? I'm like, you're dead to me.
Yeah, it's completely, and it's interesting to be able to see in hindsight how it impacts, because ADHD, I'm not sure if this is true for autism also, but with ADHD, we are pretty motivated by deadlines. Like I am not good at time management until there's actually a deadline, which might explain why journalism was a great career for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, in that case, I remember I wasn't getting paid during that. And I talked about how much I wrote in those 2 days, but there was a solid 6 weeks where I was up way too late every night. And it was impacting my daily functioning, but it was all I wanted to be doing. And that was all I was doing. But I had a job at the time that I should have been doing. And I had deadlines coming up for that. And I didn't turn my attention back to the job that was actually paying my bills until the deadline was hitting, and I felt like I was at risk of losing that job. Yeah.
And also with the hyper focus too, at least for me, I'll be thinking so much about that. It comes off as like absent-minded genius, which I fucking hate, but because it's so infantilizing. But this idea of like, oh, I'm researching something so high-minded in my daily life. I've put my coffee on the top of my car 6 days in a row and driven off with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Or a muffin or something. There's always something on the roof of the car. I actually have driven off with it. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's this extra time element where you have to bake in time for there to be problems, and you have to bake in time where you can actually go through each step of what you're doing slowly, which is a huge problem for me.
Yeah. And that's actually, when you asked me what ADHD is, the part that I forgot to mention is executive functioning. And what we're talking about right now, time management and baking in that time for what is like for every actual step and mapping it out and knowing what's involved is a huge challenge for neurodivergent people.
So I grew up, I think maybe we're around the same age, and I grew up with ADHD being misbehaving boys. And so can you talk a bit about your own diagnosis and then how you sort of got into and what you have found generally about these women who are getting diagnosed late in life?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed when I was 36. And up until that point, I would say I was really lucky in that I was interested in a lot of what we were learning in school. The subjects that I wasn't interested in didn't go well, but I was, for the most part, interested. And now that I know what ADHD looks like in women and girls, I can see my entire life, like how it has been there my entire life. But I don't think I would have even recognized, like I did really well in school. This is kind of a classic tale for a lot of women who are currently being diagnosed. Yeah, I did really well in school. And then it wasn't really until my 20s that I started to realize I'm not doing things the same way as anyone else. But in my 20s, I was fun and I was kind of sort of a rebel. And I was able to, I was in a career where, or at least in an industry where I could work on, like I worked with NBC Olympics. I could work on that for 3 months and then I could go to South America for 3 months. And it worked really well for me. I was almost like living a really great ADHD life without knowing it. But eventually you sort of want some of the things that other people have built. And I start to realize that they had a lot of these things because they had been like doing things in a disciplined way, which I hadn't done at all in my 20s. And it was really like things like career, like freelancing was fun, but eventually you want to move up in what you're doing. And that wasn't happening. It was like, I jumped from broadcast journalism to writing to grad school, back to writing, then someone offered me a job in branded content and it was like adjacent to what I had done. So it was like, yeah, let's see what it's like to have a full-time job. But it just felt like I kept making these lateral moves. And then I would also say one of the things is that dating wise, I just felt like I was always just I was convinced that I just hadn't met anyone who would be a good partner for me. And that's why none of my relationships lasted more than 4 months. But I think in hindsight, I can see that there were other things going on. And it was part of a relationship. It was part of a breakup that led to the diagnosis. Because another part of ADHD, which I had never known about, it's called rejection sensitivity. And the full name is rejection sensitive dysphoria, where I think the best description I've seen is a person goes into a sudden rage at the perceived loss of love or respect. So I think it's like people now, I see rejection sensitivity everywhere now, but it's not like you called and asked for something and someone said no. It's like someone who you loved and you thought loved you removes that. It's like big life moments. And I was shocked by the way I acted. And for 3 months, I was sort of like, what was that? And then one night I was just Googling intense reaction. I finally landed on the word rejection. I was like, I think it was that specific moment. And then I started Googling intense reactions to rejection. I came up with this article about rejection sensitive dysphoria. And this is actually a big part of the first episode of Climbing the Walls. It's sort of learning that. And I backed into, when I talked to my therapist, who I'd been seeing for 4 years, I was like, do you think there's a chance I have ADHD? And she sort of sat forward so fast on her chair that I thought she was going to fall out of it. And she was like, yeah. And I was like, wait, why haven't you told? Like, why did I have to come to this discovery on my own? And she was like, I'm a therapist. We're supposed to talk through things, but I will if you want me to. Like, she was like, take this at-home assessment. It's free from NYU. Take this, and then self-assessment, I should say, and then see what the results are. And then I can put you in touch with a psychiatrist if you want. But I remember at the moment being like, if it's so obvious, why couldn't we have figured this out sooner?
Right. I was like, she could have brought it up to you.
She totally could have. And like, but I remember at the next appointment asking her, like, sort of angrily, I was like, how did we miss this? Not only in me, but in this entire generation of women? Because by then I had started doing some reading and you're sort of like, what? And so the second half of your question about the other women I've been meeting, our stories are so similar that it's sort of shocking to me. There are a couple of women who I've met who didn't do well in school at all, but then sort of found ways through their neurodivergence, I guess you could say, in adult life and ultimately landed at a diagnosis. Like there's one woman I spoke to who's in her 50s. She was 50 when she was diagnosed and she battled addiction for a very long time. And I think that there are, for all the women we know of who are being diagnosed right now, I think there are a lot more who sort of mirror her experience more, who have not had the system or the structure around them to help them get onto a path where they're even able to interact with the healthcare system in a way that leads to a diagnosis.
I mean, I think there's also an element of when certain women misbehave, quote unquote, it gets labeled, what is it, like defiance disorder or something? Like little, you see that a lot with like little girls of color, like they'll be like diagnosed with a defiance disorder, which it's sort of up in the air if that really even exists, that it could very much be ADHD. I mean, we're white, but my little sister, I remember she got diagnosed when she was very young. And it was mostly on the back of her being like a bad kid, like her being like a difficult kid and a bad kid. And it was almost like she had to be that way in order for anyone to notice that she had anything going on, especially as a girl. Meanwhile, every little boy around her, I was like, oh man, there's some rough stuff going on there.
Yeah, there's definitely, and also especially for, you mentioned little girls of color, it's not only defiance, but there's misdiagnosis of bipolar that happens much more frequently with women of color and girls of color. And actually in the third episode of the show, I speak with a friend of mine who's Black, who was pretty sure she had ADHD. She pursues a diagnosis. And then what happens, I mean, her story follows exactly what we're told happens to women of color. And then on the flip side, a lot of women of color who are bipolar are misdiagnosed as ADHD. So there's a whole nother story to be told about the problems with our diagnostic systems. And
very recently, I used Indeed to get hired for a part-time job. The employer put their job listing up on Indeed. That's where I found it. I applied through Indeed and I got the job. Indeed made the hiring process so easy. I was able to search for all kinds of jobs based on my skills and being able to look at really easy to read descriptions from the jobs about what they were looking for in a candidate. If I needed to hire someone again, I would absolutely use Indeed. And I also have been telling everyone when they've been saying that they want to look for a job or they don't know where to find a job, I was like, you got to use Indeed. I've literally told like 4 people like, oh, I found this job on Indeed. That's where you should look if you're looking to find a job. And the job I was looking for, they needed someone really quickly because they were growing so fast. fast. So they needed to hire the right person very fast, and it was so important. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. I sincerely love Indeed. I went on there. It was incredibly easy. I literally got hired in September for a job actually using Indeed. I know this is a podcast ad, but I mean it. I really did use Indeed. I really do recommend Indeed. It all happened so fast, and I didn't even have to really stress. I found what I wanted. I got the job. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there are no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? In the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. And if you're looking to hire, you need to use Indeed because you'll find people like me. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/badwithmoney. Just go to Indeed.com/badwithmoney right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/badwithmoney. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need.
Want to grow your business fast? With TikTok ads, anything is possible. If you've ever thought about advertising your business on TikTok, now is the time to do it. You can drive more customers to your websites, sell products right in the app, and you can even use TikTok's creative tools to easily make content and find creators to help sell your products for you. Find new customers today. Just open your browser, type in getstarted.tiktok.com/TikTok ads, and grow your business fast.
What ended up happening to her?
She got the diagnosis and got treatment and I think she's someone who I would describe as always thriving, but there's so many of us that it looks like we're thriving to other people, but the internal things that are happening would not be described that way. And she's doing great now.
But what was happening when she was undiagnosed? She
was in a job that she didn't love, but stayed in it. She was, the little stories that she tells too are like, she would go into hyper focus. I'm trying to remember the exact details of what was going on, but it was like every little thing. You know what I mean? Like she tells a story in the episode where she's like, I finally started working on what I needed to work on that day at 7 p.m. And then all of a sudden at midnight, I'm making salmon croquettes. And you're like, why is this my life? And like, why is every cabinet door always open? And kind of just, she also has social anxiety. So she wasn't sure if that was tied to what was going on with her. But I think similar to a lot of us, it's like, I think some of the things that they say are common experiences for women. There's also a feminist side of me that's like, well, maybe we don't like the men we're trying to date. Like a lot of heterosexual women, it's just like, I don't know, is this a mental health condition that we have, or is there something going on in the world? But I think dating was part of it for her, just like me.
Where you would get bored, or like you would get bored after 4 months?
I would get bored, which I also found in jobs. So I started noticing all the patterns and I was like, this isn't just, I would get that way with apartments. I moved every single year when my lease was done. I would also sublet my apartment and go somewhere for 3 months. But once I went away, I'd get bored with being away and I'd want to be home. And that's how it was in relationships too. And then there were also, I feel like I tell this story sort of cleanly sometimes where I'm like, I just wasn't meeting anyone I liked. There were people I liked who I wanted to date who didn't want to date me. And I could sort of tell it was because I was more chaotic than or I don't know if that's why it was, but I could tell that I was more sort of, I don't mean chaotic in a bad way. I love my chaos, but I don't think they did. Or it wasn't what they expected from a woman, if you will.
I say this as I'm about to move for the 7th time since I've lived in Los Angeles. And my sister who has ADHD. She was like, how many times have you moved? And I was like, probably like 7. And she was like, okay, I've moved twice. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, other people settle into life and are happy with it. And I'm kind of jealous of people who are content with, like people who met someone when they were 22 and are still with them. I'm like amazing. I don't understand.
What's interesting with her is that she locks in a way, because she takes medication. She takes Adderall. She takes whatever. I don't know what else she's on. But for her, she locks in and then she kind of like, love you, Shy, but this is true. She kind of has no patience for anyone who isn't doing what she's doing. So my like ex had ADHD and would be running late all the time. And nobody gave my ex a harder time than my sister, who would be like, I have ADHD. And you know what I do? I set alarms. Like was very like, well, I've done all of these things and she runs her life like a fucking Navy. And she's like, if I've done all of this, then why are you late to the movies?
Right, exactly. And I wonder if your ex had been diagnosed as a kid or...
As a kid.
Your sister sounds like someone who's really taken treatment seriously and like recognized that treatment, so much of it is lifestyle and behavioral. They say, I don't like the word interventions because I'm just like, they're just like adjustments. And they're all adjustments so that we can live on the scale, like on the schedules that we're told we have to. But
I think a lot of it was class. Like my ex could just do that. And my sister was like, had been working in restaurants and I've never had her as a boss, but I wonder if it's sort of like she works at a drag bar and I'm like, are they running the drag bar like the fucking military right now? Like,
yeah.
I wanted to ask, what do you think is the connection with addiction?
I think it has to do with, and again, I just want to make sure I clarify, right? Like I'm not the
you're not
scientist
a
or the expert. Right.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure. But my understanding it has a lot to do with ADHD has to do with the dopamine pathways in the brain and other neurotransmitters and how they're distributed I'm pointing to my head as if, we're talking about my brain. I think it has to do with dopamine and and seeking out dopamine and stimulation. I mean, ADHD brains, it's just that our stimulation works differently. So I think that addiction gives people stimulation. I mean, that's what it does, right? So I think that I think that you could almost say, now this is 100% not scientific, but this is my thought. I think that a lot of the hyperfocus might be leaning into sort of the same thing. Like ultimately we're all looking for stimulation and our brains are seeking it out and they're going to do anything they can to get it. Like there's a couple of well-known ADHD, they're neuroscientists who have studied ADHD for years who talk about how boredom is like kryptonite for people with ADHD. So if you're not getting that stimulation, like I've always thought that I'm extremely lucky in that I'm like as a kid, I was always reading, which seems counterintuitive to ADHD and kids who don't focus well. But I got stimulation from it, from like being in these other worlds that books created. And I got stimulation from, as sad as this sounds, I'm like, I got a lot of stimulation if I got straight A's. Like I love that reward pipeline. So I think that if you don't enjoy school and you didn't get stimulation from that, and then you find a source of something that does give you these things but there's a much more scientific way to explain addiction and ADHD. I just don't have it nailed down.
I think it makes sense. And also maybe the idea of sort of numbing the noise or trying to, I'm like, I listen to you talk and I'm like, I hope there's as much overlap. Otherwise I have ADHD.
I mean, I think what you're saying too is you just said something that sparked for me that another huge part of ADHD for a lot of people is rumination. And it has to do with, there's a book called ADHD 2.0 that explains the fairly new, like I would say, emerging science of what's happening with this. But there's something called the default mode network and the task positive network. And it has to do with how much your brain is stimulated in these two networks. And if I understand this properly, in quote unquote neurotypical people, those two networks don't try to activate at the same time.
Oh.
In people with ADHD and neurodivergent people, those networks tend to be activated at the same time. And it creates a lot of that internal noise, but it also creates a lot of rumination. They sort of these two authors describe rumination as essentially, this is not a quote, but they essentially say it's like creativity applied to the past. So the same way that neurodivergent people tend to be extremely creative looking forward and maybe figuring out other ways to live life that aren't the standard paths, we're also able to cycle through things that happened in the past over and over and over. And rumination is essentially imagining other ways they could have gone. So, and that was so helpful to me. When I read that line, I was like, that's what ruminating is. And the doctors give this advice that they're like, think of it as a channel on like an old TV and you need to turn the channel because your neurodivergent brain is actually so easily distracted that you have to actually initiate the distraction yourself. So like they say, like start cooking and you'll start smelling the cooking and you'll stop thinking necessarily about all the rumination. But you do have to, it's hard sometimes to individually get up and change the channel, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people, I think it's interesting. I would be like, oh, it's so cool that you move so much or that you're doing all these things. But you were talking about how the problem was that it was keeping you from the things that you wanted.
Yeah. And I think the things I was doing were the things I wanted in the moment. I should be very clear on that, right? Like when I booked like a last minute flight somewhere, it was not like it wasn't anything more than me wanting to do it. But when I was like looking ahead at life, it was sort of like when I'm 70, what do I want my life to have been? And I don't think, who knows, maybe I would have been happy with this. But at the time I was like, I don't think I want it to have been a series of 4-month trips that lasted 70 years. Like, I think I want to have, you know, felt like I did something. And as I've said, like I wasn't great at relationships, but I wanted to have kids. So I was sort of grappling with that because it's like, how do you do that? I've since figured out how to do that without being in a relationship. So I'm like, oh, good. I wish I hadn't spent so many years of my life trying to figure that part out. But yeah. So it's sort of like those bigger picture things that you want and starting to, I think by your mid 30s, if there are bigger picture things you're sure you want, and you haven't even been in a relationship, because I kind of sort of was like, I don't expect my first relationship to be the one that lasts long enough to have children together. I just didn't think that would be possible. So when I'm hitting 34 and I haven't even been in that first relationship, I can do math, you know? I was sort of like, if I'm in one that lasts a couple of years and then that ends and then it takes a couple of years, I don't think my body, like I wouldn't be able to have kids anymore. So that was on my mind a lot.
So it's the idea of not being able to plan very far ahead or do things in the moment that would benefit the future.
Yeah, you just distilled it perfectly. That's exactly what it was. It's sort of like the bigger picture things that you want and starting to realize that like if I keep living the way that seems to feel good every day, I don't think I'm going to accomplish the bigger picture. Even like career-wise, like in my 20s, I was very aware. Like I said, I just kept jumping. And then I was finally like, if I keep moving laterally, you never move up. And then that even brings you into money because it's like, if I keep moving laterally, I keep making the money I made when I was 22. And at 32, you're starting to realize that most people in their 60s and 70s are not living off a salary. And I was kind of sort of like, I don't want to be broke when I'm 70 because I did whatever I wanted to do every day when I was 25.
I know it's so hard though, because it's like, well, that's, you know, that's what you want to do today. So you could die tomorrow. I don't know. But that's kind of the crux of this show is that kind of thing is that you could get hit by a bus tomorrow, but also you didn't get hit by a bus yesterday. So that's sort of the whole theme of this podcast, I think, in some ways.
I think I started to reach a point too where I was like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, would I want to be able to, I mean, I wouldn't know it, but do you want to leave anything behind? I don't know. I was kind of sort of like, I started imagining it as this like, well, even if this money is in a bank somewhere, rather than having all been spent, then when I die, it'll go to something good. And I have it like mapped out to what like charity organizations I want it all to go to. Because I started thinking of it that way. Because I was like, yeah, because you're right. It's really hard to like break down that, well, I might die tomorrow. So who cares what's in the bank? But I might not die. And then I do care.
Right.
Yeah.
And also the resentment, I think, of the world not being built for you, or the resentment of how come other people can jump around to jobs and get what they want, or, you know, I think that's maybe part of rumination is to be like, well, if I had just done what this other person did.
Or the resentment that I'm like, if the bosses just recognize that I might do things differently, but they get done and they often get done faster. I might not be the most polite person at work all the time, but like, I often felt like I was doing things the way men at work did things. But because I was a woman, I wasn't allowed to do them the way that men did them. And it wasn't recognized as this like creative ability. It was recognized as rudeness or something, like I just drove
you
me
don't have
crazy.
to tell autism twice.
Yeah.
What was like, what kind of things are you talking about?
Even like my reactions to things like I haven't seen a scientific study that backs this up, but there's a lot out there right now about how ADHD and neurodivergent people are very justice minded. And I was, that definitely came up at work. And I would, I think I was a team player, but there were certain situations where like I would be asked to do something that was entirely not part of my job. And I was being asked by someone who never even did any parts of their job. And I would make a big deal out of it. And I would then be told I wasn't a team player. And it would be like, no, I think I am. I think this person's never pulling their weight. But you're not really allowed to say that when you're in more junior roles. And I think there was a situation where a new boss was hired who he wanted to do all the fun parts of the job. Like there was just a lot of friction. I've had friction with people and I remember in that situation, one of the higher up bosses saying like, Danielle, you wear your heart on your sleeve. And I don't know how to hide what I'm thinking or what, it's very clear what I'm thinking at almost all times. But when I'm in work situations where it feels very even and just, I guess, if you will, I think I do really well. So it's not, I've seen that pattern too, where I'm like, once you've been in a few good workplaces, you're like, no, it's not always me. It's also people's expectations or just like what they think makes you a good worker compared to actually analyzing your work. I think is one. I forget what your original question was there, but
that's fine. There's what is the difference? There's also, I think, something to the idea of men being fearless and women being chaotic.
Yeah.
Like you going to a new place and doing, listen, I've been both. It's definitely opened my eyes to a lot of, not that I needed proof of misogyny, but it's just kind of opened my eyes to that a lot.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's been interesting since the diagnosis to be able to recognize, like actually the moment we just had, I remember one boss had I think I was 32 to 34 at this, it was a project, but it lasted 2 years. So I remember him at one point saying, and he was very misogynistic, but I remember him at one point saying, Danielle, you interrupt too much. And I was sort of like, well, you just don't let women speak. But then once I was diagnosed and I really started to take stock of how much I interrupt people, I was like, maybe it was a combination. Like maybe it wasn't just his misogyny. It was also me.
I know part of it is like, oh, I know what you're saying. So we can move on.
100%. Yeah.
But people need to express themselves. And so it's not about that. Like I just had a whole thing at the doctor's office where, well, because my voice is ambiguous, I guess, they thought that I was booking for someone named Gabriel Dunn and that I was a woman, and they didn't understand that I was the person booking the appointment. And part of it was, I think that in my mind, the most efficient way to have the conversation is, hi, booking for Gabriel Dunn. Here's the phone number. Here's the address. Here's the date of birth. But then someone was like, well, why wouldn't you say, hi, I'd like to book an appointment for a spinal MRI and then introduce yourself. And I was like, because if I'm saying like, hi, I'd like to book we've already wasted time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And booking an appointment, Gabriel, because I was like, well, they need to look up my name first. So just say the name right off the bat. Then they know who they're booking for. And the people were like, no, incorrect.
Yeah, but I agree with you because I'm just like, you've made that call to a doctor's office how many times in your life? You know what their next question is going to be. You anticipate the question and you answer it without having to be asked. But it's sort of like this. That doesn't work for a lot of people. Yeah. I can completely relate to what you're describing.
Because to me, I know they open the file, right? They're just going to open the file. So once they open the file, they'll have all the information that they're looking for. But if I just start saying like, I'd like to, you know what I mean? That's not right, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. I don't know. Yeah. I relate so hard to what you just said about like, once you understand, like, I get it. I know what you're saying. I absolutely love my older sister, but our entire lives, it has been like, she is going to tell you the story until she is done telling it. And I'm going to sit there like, almost bursting. Like sometimes I'll just like walk away. I just like in a way that you could only do to a sister, but I'm just like, I get it. I can't listen anymore. And it's like alarm bells going off in my entire body.
But then let me tell a story 45 times.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because you're interested in it. It's interesting to you. Right?
Part of what you were talking about is that you got really hyper fixated on money and investments, which I guess I have also done since we are here. You saying that it started from realizing you wanted to like leave stuff behind or have certain things in terms of stability. How did that start, or what was the first thing that you did?
Yeah, I think I would say it actually took a few years. And I should say it goes all the way back to, like, I saw your most recent episode. I listened to the beginning of it as I was prepping today. And my parents are both CPAs. So I should clarify.
The fuck?
I know. And my older sister, it's just like, I'm from this accounting family. And I was always considered the worst financial. My mom every single year is like, Danielle, you are my worst client. I can't, like, it's just this like ongoing thing. So I should just throw in the thing here that there was also a personal thing to prove that I am not as bad with money as my family claims I am. And I was always like, I just do things differently. And also my mom defies she 100% has ADHD, undiagnosed, but at this point she'll talk to me about it. And that's been like my other mission the last 3 years, is to get her to recognize her own ADHD. Mm-hmm. She does now, but she defies everything because people love to be like people with ADHD would never be accountants. And I'm like, oh no, my mother and her ability to hyper focus on someone's tax return and the amount of joy she gets out of doing taxes is like, right? Something incredible. Yeah. But for instance, I sent her all of my tax stuff this year in one nice Google Drive folder, and even said I included a table of contents that has every piece of information to answer every question you're going to ask me, because I'm turning 40 this year, right? 40 years of my mother asking me the same question every year. You finally like, if I want to have a better relationship with my mom for these 4 months of the year, I should probably, like during tax season, I should probably learn how to do this. She didn't read it. I got a list of the same questions again. And I called her and I was like, I included everything this year. Like, what the hell? Like, why didn't you? All the answers are there. And she's like, oh, is that what that sheet was? It just looked like, she literally said, it looked like verbiage. So I didn't read it. And it was like one Excel sheet.
She wanted numbers.
She just wanted, because I had, I think 10 different 1099s this year. Like I work with a lot of different companies. And that's the other reason I'm such a bad client, is because I'm very disorganized about it all. And I'm like, here you go, some numbers. But that's the long answer to the fact that it was a personal thing. Like there was a personal proving point for me. But then I would say the first thing I remember, I graduated college in 2007.
Okay.
And then we went into this massive recession. You know, my parents are accountants. They love a sale. I grew up like, if something's on sale, that's when you buy it. And I remember from 2008 to 2010 thinking, if only I had money right now. The whole economy is on sale. Like the economy is going to drop.
The economy's on sale. Wait, like, that's a wild way to think of that.
That's what I kept thinking, because I was like, this doesn't affect me. I didn't have money in it, but I don't have any money to put in it. So I was sort of like aware of a missed opportunity that.
Oh, and there's nothing worse than ruminating on that.
I ruminated so much, but I was like, I don't even know how people buy stocks. Like to me, stocks were the thing that like my great Aunt Mary had when she died. And there were stock certificates that people were trying to figure out what to do with. So this is going to be like a long build up to when I actually hyper-focused on it. I would say that then pattern recognition came in for the next few years. I started to notice like someone I worked with who was about 10 years older, her husband hadn't really worked very much, but he was in his mid 30s and they were comfortably buying like a very, very nice apartment. And I was like, how are you doing that? Like, I don't understand. And it wasn't all family money. It was that he was like, oh, I bought Apple stock a long time ago. And I was like, okay, how did you do that? So then I got him to show me I remember he showed me how to start an account with TD Ameritrade and like showed me how you can buy, or it wasn't TD Ameritrade then. I forget what it was. Or no, it was TD. Now they're Schwab. Yeah. So it was TD at the time. But I remember being like, $10 to buy stock. Like I didn't want to pay to buy stocks. And because every transaction cost $10, I was like, not understanding long-term investments at that point. I also, this might give you some indication of what I'm like, but I graduated with student loans and I didn't want to have debt because to me, like I grew up thinking that debt was the worst thing you could have, but not understanding investing. I was sort of in that like middle zone. So it was like, keep the money you have.
Did you have student loans?
I had about 20,000 in student loans. So I didn't have not like crippling student debt, but I decided I was going to pay that off before I would ever spend any money that I earned. So I wasn't understanding interest rates and that it would have been better to invest it. Instead, I lived at my parents' house and the first $20,000 that I made went straight to student loans and I paid them off. And then I felt like I can start my life now. Yeah, like it was sort of like, but I just didn't understand investing yet. So then when my friend's husband said this thing about stock, I got him to show me. And I think I thought it was a big deal because I had put $500 in and I was just excited because I had $500 to put in. So that would be like 2009. And then I started to notice over the years that these guys that I dated for like 4 months, often in New York, they wouldn't really be working. Like one was a lawyer who had not passed the bar, but all he talked about was his investments. Another one was someone who told me that he ran a hedge fund and he was also an accountant, but he like lived in a lofted bed in his friend's hallway. Like he didn't really have a bedroom, but he was running a hedge fund. And I was like, what are you doing with these spreadsheets all the time? And he gave me a very simple explanation. He was like, you should be investing. If you think the economy will exist in 50 years, you should be investing. And I sort of took that because I was like, when you put it that way, like, I do think the economy will exist in 50 years. So it was just a series of these guys who the pattern that I recognized was that they had all grown up definitely in families with more money than mine. And they were doing what their parents had sort of just done. And they were investing. And I was doing what my parents had done, which was stay out of debt. And I kind of looked ahead and I was like, I love my parents. They've set us up very well to, like be financially even, I would say. But I wanted to know how to get to this like other tier of what all of these people's parents were doing. I think it was 2013 or 14. I was working at CBS and I did a friend and I did a story on someone who was following the FIRE movement. And then at the same time, a friend of mine got into the FIRE movement and he retired at 32 and told me he would have $1 million in the bank. He retired with 300,000 total in savings or invested. And he showed me the numbers that said he would have $1 million by 40. And that's the year we're in now. And he has $1 million and he had 300,000 when he retired 8 years ago. And he has not worked since. Wow. So I sort of looked at that. And when you look at those patterns, that's where the hyper focus really kicked in. I was like, what is this FIRE movement thing? But I didn't want to adjust my life. I don't like budgeting. I'm never going to budget. I'm going to budget well enough to not go into debt because it's so baked into me. And that's something that I didn't have to learn. It was just like so baked into us since, two parents who are CPAs. Yeah, I hyper focused on what the FIRE movement was. And then I sort of figured out how to make it work with, like, I want to work. I love working. It's kind of the only thing that stimulates me in the way that it does. So I'm lucky in that sense too, but I hyper focused on that and on safely investing in ETFs. And I set a sort of financial goal for 40. And I would say that I think gamifying it has helped me a lot. Like I came up with no money Mondays and made every Monday a game where I couldn't even buy coffee. And the sort of reward element of that, like at the end of every Monday when I hadn't spent any money, it was like, you did it. Here's a gold star. And like that was enough for my brain. And then I sometimes tried to see how many days I could do that in a week. So there was some of that, but I also knew that like not buying coffee wasn't going to make me comfortable at 70, Right. I was like, that's not going to be it. But yeah, I tried to sort of gamify it as much as I could. And then the one other thing I started that helped me a lot was, I think I've said this, but I just don't like spreadsheets. I don't like doing all of that. Like my mom sits down and does her QuickBooks every single night.
What?
And I think, yeah, like I think that she has several neurodivergences going on, I think, but I don't know what they are. But anyway, she does her QuickBooks every night and it drives her really, really nuts that I don't follow anything and I don't keep receipts. And like that is like, I am like Satan sometimes in her eyes because of that.
Yeah.
But the one thing I did pick up was I wanted to know if any of this investing was actually working. So I started an Excel sheet that's just on December 31st of every year. I look at the balances of every account that I have. And then I've been tracking that since 2011 and I can see the growth. So I know it's working and that's enough for me. And I know that there's apps and there's things you can connect and you can, like I have a Wealthfront account now that wants me to connect 7 other accounts and then I could see it all in one, but the password links never work and like nothing ever, it never works. So
nothing ever lines up. I know. They'll be like, this bank doesn't connect to this bank. And I'm like, are you serious?
And I'm like, well, then just connect. I don't understand. Like, that's maybe where my executive functioning goes awry. And I'm like, I'm not going to sit here and or I'll start to relink it. And then, I don't know, I'll get distracted by something. And a week later, it hasn't been relinked. Yeah.
It's the thing about you have to have money to make money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you have to have money to put in. You have to, like, have the information. Like, I think when we were the same age, and when I was that age, I simply did not know anything about that,
No. Yeah, no. And I would say because of that and recognizing like, I was just so lucky that my friend's husband mentioned, I just kept asking people like, how do you have this? Are your parents giving you money? And if their response was no, I invested, I started thinking of it as like, well, your parents taught you how to do that because you started doing that young enough that someone was talking about it. And I was like, so how do I sort of create my own trust fund, if you will? And like what you just said about getting your money to make money, I was like, yeah, I enjoy working. I don't want to do it forever. And when people said to me, like, your money needs to earn money, I was like, well, how? How do I get it to do that? And then that's where I hyper focused on like, how do I get my money to be the passive? And also one other thing I remember, just as far as noticing patterns, I remember my friend's dad saying to me, they moved here when my friend was in 2nd grade, I think. And I think not having always lived in the US and the American system and like the American dream, he was like, we bought a house because it's what you're supposed to do. But I think we would be extremely better off if I had never bought that house and I had invested my money instead. And that one sentence from him stuck with me so much that I will say I tried to buy a house. This is where my ADHD, like I tried to buy an apartment. I probably looked at more than 100 of them. I never made a decision, never bought it. And now I feel like there's no chance I'm buying right now. Like now with mortgage rates and with everything, I'm just not doing it. But his advice was the reason, I didn't rush to do it. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I'm sort of in a place where I'm like, well, life really certainly does come at you. Are you still hyperfixated on that? Or you think sometimes it's like the fixation leads to fixation,
I would say I got so hyperfixated on it that there was one point, well, I had stopped freelancing for a little while. So I stopped paying as much attention. But then when I went back to freelancing, the year after the pandemic was the first year that I was so fixated on saving as much as I possibly could that when it did come time to pay my taxes, I didn't have like any money in the bank to pay them. And that's when I also noticed a pattern that I was like, there probably have been 3 or 4 years over the last 15 when I was like, Mom, can you front me the money for my taxes? I'll pay you back within, like, I know I'm getting this check in the next 6 months. Like companies were late on paying me. I had earned enough, but I hadn't.
Oh, journalism, freelance journalism is 90% of it is begging them to pay you.
And there's nothing worse to me than then calling my older sister to be like, I don't want to ask Mom this year. Can you front me the money for my taxes? And then luckily the company came through with the money the day before it was actually going to come out of my account.
Oh my
so I was able to
God.
call her and be like, just kidding. But I was like, if only this company had paid me on time. Like, so there's certain things where it's like, I don't know. But I had gotten so fixated on investing everything as quickly as I could that I didn't have enough cash to actually pay those bills when they came up. And I had learned by then that I didn't want to sell off stock in order to pay for taxes, because then you're just going to, like I had started to understand capital gains and all of that. So I would say I over fixated on it. And I've now finally 2 weeks before 40, I think I'm like aware of how to manage it well enough to have enough when tax time comes around. But that might just be because I made enough this year and that the thing I was starting to say earlier is that today would probably be, it's probably the funniest day, ironically funny, to say I'm not as bad with money as I used to be. Because someone who's saying like, I'm good because I invested things like today, I don't know. I don't know if the day we're recording this will come up in the final episode, but watching what happened yesterday, I'm sort of like, do I know anything about money? Should I have just been buying houses this whole time? Like, what am I doing? I don't know. Will I be okay when I'm 70? So there is a lot of ruminating happening. My ADHD also was incredibly problematic when I had money. I had at one point decided crypto was interesting, but I was like very hesitantly putting a little bit of money into it.
Yeah.
And then I would be fine if not for, I don't know how often you like to get into real numbers, but I had moved money into BlockFi from a very safe crypto exchange into BlockFi. And I probably lost like $80,000 worth of crypto only because I had put it into BlockFi because it was interest bearing. And I was like, great, put my money to work, like earn interest on my crypto. How exciting is that? I think I earned like $1,000 worth of interest on something that when BlockFi went kaput, it's now, and I say I lost 80,000, it was worth 12,000 at the time. They ultimately like returned whatever our money was worth at the time, but it would now be worth like 80 or 90 or something like that.
If you had kept it?
Like if BlockFi had never gone bankrupt or whatever we can say happened to it. Like if that money, if the amount of crypto that I had at the time of the bankruptcy had just stayed in BlockFi this whole time, it would now be worth like 80. If that makes sense. So every time I look at what my current like personal worth is, I'm like, plus that money that you just lost, you know. But a lot of people lost a lot more than that. But I would say, I'm like saying that I blame it on my ADHD because it was only, I like call my ADHD shiny ball syndrome. And I was like, oh, an interest bearing account, like shiny ball. I went straight there and I didn't look at the risks. I didn't look into it at all. I didn't pay attention when warning signs were coming up about BlockFi. So I now am a much safer. Yeah, I'm now kind of just all about ETFs. I'm just like, yeah. That one X that I told you said, do you think the economy will exist? If so, just invest in the whole economy and you'll be okay.
Yeah, we're recording this on April 4th, and I was going to say that a bunch of tariffs went into effect, and Trump is doing a number on the stock market. I think mine retirement dropped $15,000.
Yeah, I think I'm probably around the same.
Which, so cool.
I haven't looked because I'm afraid to look.
Yeah, I shouldn't have.
I look like 7 times a day. It's kind of a sickness. Like, talk about hyperfocus. I open my accounts and look. Oh, that was another moment of hyperfocus when Robinhood was created. I was like, day one, sign up. Because I told you, I didn't want to pay that $10 transaction fee. I was like, I don't have to pay $10 anymore. I've since stopped using Robinhood for many reasons, but I keep the Robinhood app on my phone, and that's where I check stock prices. I don't know why. That's still the one where I look, and I open it like 7 times a day, but my balance isn't there. So I'm not always looking at my balance. I'm just looking at, but now this creates another moment. Like I said, 2008 was like friends. I've sort of, because so few people talk about money, I've started talking about it with my friends at every possible opportunity. And I'm just like, you should all be thinking about this. We should be doing this. But I'm like, but don't take advice from me because I'm not a fight. You know, I always like give it that. During the pandemic, one of them was like, what do you think of investing right now? And I was like, stock market's on sale. Get in there. The economy's on sale. Like, we're all in our 30s and 40s. Like, if you plan to hope to be alive in your 70s, I hope even if it's a long recovery, I'm very much like, so that's sort of what I'm telling myself again now. I'm like, it's on sale. It might go on sale further. I don't know what moment of the sale you want to hit. Like, we might be in that moment where it's like 10% off. It's going to go to 70% off. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like buying JetBlue stock in March 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back with a bonus on another day. Where can people find you and your podcast?
The podcast is called Climbing the Walls. I think it's everywhere that podcasts are, everywhere that you listen. I'm like, what's the perfect way to say that? I think the podcast is, I know it's on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere else where you can get your podcasts. And it's from an organization called understood.org.
Cute. Bad with Money with Gabriel S. Dunn is a production of Noted Bisexual, produced by Melisa D. Monts and Diamond MPrint Productions. Edited by Diane Kang, post-production sound by Coco Llorens, production assistance by Melanie D. Watson, and music by Mike Kaplan, Zach Sherwin, and Jack Dolgen, sung by Sam Barbera. Thank you, love you, bye!